Alright, in today's lesson we're following up on Chapter 8, Section 3. We're going to do a little Part 2. We're still pursuing State Standard number 3, which says students are adept at operations on polynomials including long division. Now I know we've already covered long division, but the state has an interesting way of testing you on that. So they're going to ask you to recall something from elementary school and from your geometry class. And that is, they're going to ask you to recall the formula for the volume of a right rectangular prism. So first of all, rectangular and right rectangular prism just means that every side of this shape is a rectangle, and every face of the rectangle meets each other's face at right angles, and therefore the formula that we recall is going to be the volume is the length times the width times the height. So given that information, the state's going to give you a question very similar to this. It's going to say if the volume of a right rectangular prism, which we have in our picture here, is x to the third minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6, and then they'll give you one of these dimensions, either the length or the width or the height. In this example, I'm telling you the height is x minus 1. You need to find the length and the width. And so our strategy for that is long division, and that's how the state's going to test you on long division. So we know one of the dimensions, the height in this particular example, is x minus 1. We will have to divide that into what they told us is the volume, x to the third minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6, using long division. So now let's focus our attention on the problem at hand now that we have it set up. To long division, we ask ourselves the question, what times x is going to give me x to the third? And the answer to that is x squared. Since we're dividing by a binomial, put that over the second term in our dividend and distribute out. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times negative 1 is negative x squared. Normally in long division we would subtract, but I suggest that we make fewer mistakes if we add the opposites. So we're adding a negative x cubed and a positive x squared. When we do so, the x to the thirds subtract out to 0. X to the third plus negative x to the third is 0x to the third. And then negative 2x squared plus positive 1x squared is negative x squared. At this point in long division, we bring down the next term and repeat the whole process. So bring down the minus 5x. Repeat the process. What times x gives us negative x squared? And the answer to that question is a minus x. Let's distribute that out. Negative x times x is going to give us negative x squared. Negative x times a negative 1 is a positive x. And again, students make fewer mistakes if instead of subtracting your polynomials, we add the opposites. So instead of subtracting, we're adding an x squared and adding a negative x. When we do so, the x squareds will drop out to 0 again, which is what we intended. Negative 5x plus negative 1x is negative 6x. Next step in the process, bring down the next term, which is the last term in the dividend, plus 6. Repeat the whole process again and ask ourselves the question, what times x gives us negative 6x? The answer to that is a negative 6. Distribute this out. Negative 6 times x is negative 6x. Negative 6 times negative 1 is positive 6. Again, instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposites. And when we do, the negative 6x plus positive 6x drops out to 0. 6 plus negative 6 drops out to 0. Now at this point, we're not finished. What we have is we know that what we started with, the volume of this right rectangular prism, x to the third minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6, is equal to the side they gave us, x minus 1. Now, the product of the other two dimensions, the length and the width, is x squared minus x minus 6. From here, to finish out the problem, because we have to find the length and the width, we turn to strategies that we learned in Chapter 4. Chapter 4, we know how to factor a trinomial. This happens to be what I would call FOIL backwards because we have a coefficient of 1. So to factor x squared minus x minus 6, we know that when we do the first term of FOIL backwards, x squared has to be x times x. If the signs are minus and minus in my trinomial, in my factored binomials, hopefully you still remember this. We're reviewing for the semester exam as we do this. The signs have to be one of each. And that means we want factors of 6 that subtract to give us 1. The only choices for that are 3 and 2. Since the second term, or the linear term, is negative, we put the 3 with the minus sign, the 2 with the plus sign. So x squared minus x minus 6 factors as x plus 2 times x minus 3. And those are the remaining two dimensions of our right rectangular prism. We don't know which is which. So we know one of them is x plus 2 and the other is x minus 3, but we don't know exactly which is the length and which is the width. And that's fine because the state's not going to ask us that. They're just going to want to know the other two dimensions. So again, to do a quick summary of this problem, state gave us a right rectangular prism. They told us the volume of it was x cubed minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6. They told us one of the dimensions. They could have told us the length. They could have told us the width. In this particular example, we told you the height. You need to do long division of that one dimension into the volume. And then take your quotient, in this case x squared minus x minus 6, and factor that. That factored into x plus 2, x minus 3. And actually, we're going to practice going the other direction, because sometimes the state is not going to just tell us to do the long division. Sometimes they're going to throw another problem in which says find the volume. So if they told us the length is something, the width is something, the height is something, find the volume, then we need to practice multiplying three binomials together. So they could say the length is x minus 1, the width is x plus 2, the height is x minus 3. Let's multiply them. Now the numbers I've chosen in this particular example, for example 2, are the exact same that we used, x minus 1, x plus 2, x minus 3. So as we multiply these together, we get a chance to check our answer and see if it's correct. Right, when multiplying three numbers, we can only multiply any two at a time. So let's take the last two and FOIL them out. So x times x, when we do the first, that gives us x squared. Doing the outsides gives us minus 3x. Inside is positive 2x. Last is negative 6. Then we simplify any like terms there. Negative 3x plus 2x is negative 1x. And this takes us back to a problem from chapter 4. So again, we are reviewing for the semester exam and the STAR testing as we do this. We've got a binomial times a trinomial. We thought of that as double the distributive property. Make sure x in the binomial gets multiplied by each term in the trinomial. Make sure the negative 1 in the binomial gets multiplied by each term in the trinomial. So let's do that. We've got x times x squared is x to the third. X times negative x is negative x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. And then we need to make sure that negative 1 gets multiplied by each term in the trinomial. So doing that, negative 1 times x squared is negative x squared. Negative 1 times negative x is positive x. Negative 1 times negative 6 is positive 6. And then all that's left is to find any like terms and combine them. Well, there are no other x cubed, so let's start by writing down the x cubed term. Let's collect the x squared terms that are like. So we've got a negative x squared and another negative x squared. That gives us negative 2x squared. We have a negative 6x and a positive 1x. That becomes negative 5x. And every term is accounted for except for the constant, so let's add that. Plus 6. And x to the third minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6 is my answer we get from multiplying these three binomials together. And if we want to check that in example 1, x cubed minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 6 was the volume that we started with. When we did our long division and our factoring, I just multiplied those binomials together, those three binomials together, to check our answer. So once again, on the state standard, it says you need to be adept at operations on polynomials. These two problems, we just showed in example 2, how to multiply three binomials. And rather than just asking you to multiply those three binomials on the worksheet I'm giving you for homework today, and the state might just say one of those binomials is the length, the other is the width, and the third is the height. Find the volume. So you have to recall this formula from elementary school in geometry. Volume of a right rectangular prism is length times width times height. When the state tests for long division, they might do what we see in example 1. Here's a right rectangular prism. They're going to tell you the volume is some polynomial. They will either tell you the length, the width, or the height, one of those dimensions, and ask you to find the other two sides. And so what we need to do is remember long division. We take the volume divided by one of the dimensions, then take that quotient and factor it as we factored in chapter 4. Alright, so that's today's exercise. We need to consider long division. We need to consider recalling the formula for volume of a right rectangular prism. And we will see as we look at the released questions from the state test that this is something they like to do.